The chapel smelled like lilies and lies. Margaret's mahogany casket sat at the front, surrounded by enough white roses to bankrupt a florist. Her sister Patricia stood next to it, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief that probably cost more than my first car. My daughter Emily sat 3 rows back, texting. Richard, Margaret's estate attorney for the past 15 years, cleared his throat at the lectern. Before we conclude today's service, he said, I've been instructed to make an announcement regarding Margaret's estate. Patricia's head snapped up. Emily pocketed her phone. Margaret's will, Richard continued, pulling a cream envelope from his breast pocket, leaves the entirety of her estate, including the properties in Denver and Vail, her investment portfolio, and all personal assets to her sister Patricia. The chapel went silent. Patricia's tears dried up instantly, replaced by something that looked like triumph. Emily stood so fast her purse hit the pew with a crack. I laughed, not a chuckle, a full, genuine laugh that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Richard's eyes found mine across the crowd. He didn't smile, but I caught the slight tilt of his head. That told me everything. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who should love you most, take a second to like this video. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. Let me back up. To understand why I laughed at my wife's funeral, you need to know how we got here. And it started 42 years ago in a coffee shop near the University of Denver. I met Margaret when she was 24, and I was 26. She was a paralegal at a small firm downtown, brilliant and sharp-tongued and completely out of my league. I was an engineer at a manufacturing company, pulling 60-hour weeks and living in a basement apartment that smelled like mildew. She said yes to coffee anyway. You're not trying to impress me, she said on our 3rd date. I like that. Can't afford to impress you, I admitted. Student loans, honest too, she smiled. Marry me in 5 years and we'll call it even. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. 5 years later we got married at Denver's city courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon. No big ceremony. No expensive reception. We spent our honeymoon weekend at a cabin near Estes Park that cost $90 a night. Promise me something, she said the last night, watching stars from the cabin's porch. If I ever become like Patricia, obsessed with money and appearances, you'll call me out. Patricia, her older sister by 6 years, had just married a plastic surgeon. Their wedding at the Brown Palace Hotel cost more than my annual salary. I promise, I said. Margaret squeezed my hand. And if anything ever happens to me, don't let her take what we built. She didn't earn it. At the time I thought it was just sister rivalry. I didn't know it was a warning. We spent the next 4 decades building something quiet and solid. I worked my way up from junior engineer to senior engineer, then director of operations at a manufacturing company, making precision aerospace components. The work was steady. The pay increased every year. I never made headlines, but I made a difference. Margaret went to night school for her law degree, while working full-time as a paralegal. She studied at the kitchen table after dinner, case law books spread across the surface, highlighter in hand. She passed the bar at 32, the same week she found out she was pregnant with Emily. I want to help people who actually need help, she told me the night she got her bar results. Not corporations dodging taxes. Her mother thought she was crazy. You have a good job, she said. Why risk it? Because 50 years from now, Margaret replied, I want to know I made a difference. She rented a tiny office above a bookstore on Colfax Avenue. The landlord gave her a discount after hearing what kind of law she practiced. Some months Margaret barely broke even. Other months, she took on pro bono work for clients who couldn't afford to pay. Women escaping bad marriages, fathers fighting for custody. People the system had forgotten. But she was happy. We didn't live extravagantly. Our house in Denver's Congress Park neighborhood was a modest bungalow we bought in 1989 for $127,000. I drove a 2015 Toyota Camry with 140,000 miles on it. Margaret had a Subaru Outback she'd owned for 9 years. You too could retire to something nicer, Patricia said every Thanksgiving, looking around our dated kitchen with disgust. She and her husband lived in an upscale neighborhood, with 7 bedrooms, and a view that cost them $2.4 million. "We like it here," Margaret always replied. What Patricia didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that Margaret and I had been investing carefully since our late 20s. Not flashy stocks or crypto, but steady index funds and real estate. The Vale property, we bought it in 1998 for $340,000. It was now worth $2.8 million. The Congress Park house, worth $1.4 million. Margaret's investment portfolio, $4.2 million. Together we'd built an estate worth approximately $8.6 million. And we'd told exactly 3 people, our financial advisor, our estate attorney Richard, and each other, not Emily, not Patricia, no one. "The day we tell Emily about the money," Margaret said once, "is the day she stops seeing us as parents and starts seeing us as a retirement plan." She wasn't wrong. Emily, our only child, had always been transactional. 3 months ago Margaret got diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She was 66. The doctors gave her 6 months. She made it to 4, and 2 weeks before she died, Patricia started visiting every single day. Emily graduated from college with a marketing degree and a talent for calculating every interaction down to the dollar. When she called, it was always to ask for something. Never just to talk. Never just to check in. "Hey Dad," she'd say. Voice bright. "How's it going?" We'd chat for 2 minutes. Then so I was actually calling because a loan for the business she wanted to start that never launched. Help with her condo mortgage when she bought something she couldn't afford in the tech center. Money for a new car when the one she had ran fine. Just covering the gap until my bonus hits, Dad. The bonus never hit. Or it did. And she spent it on something else. Then she met Bryce. Bryce talked about money the way gamblers talk about luck. Constantly, confidently, and usually wrong. He called himself a cryptocurrency consultant. Margaret called him a red flag with a leased car. Emily moved in with him 6 months later into a condo they couldn't afford. Their mailbox was full of late notices. 3 weeks before Margaret went into hospice, Emily called with a pitch. "Dad, Bryce has this opportunity," she said. "He just needs $75,000. "For what?" I asked. "You wouldn't understand. It's tech stuff. Try me." She didn't. Her voice went cold. "I thought you'd want to help your daughter." "I want to help you not throw money into a scam," I said. She hung up. Over 5 years Emily had asked me for money 17 times. I kept track in a small notebook Margaret gave me. "Write it down," she said. "You'll want to remember." When Margaret got sick, Emily found out 2 weeks after the diagnosis. "I'll come visit soon," she said. "Things are just really busy with work right now." She didn't visit. Not once. But Patricia? Patricia became the devoted sister overnight. Patricia had never been devoted to anything except appearances. In 3 years she'd called Margaret twice. Once for a party invite we declined. Once for a legal favor Margaret refused. Patricia stopped calling after that. But 2 weeks before Margaret died, everything changed. Patricia showed up every afternoon at 2 o'clock with expensive gifts and fake memories. Organic soup. Cashmere blankets. Stories about a childhood that never happened. "Remember when we were kids and we'd sneak cookies?" Patricia said one day, smiling that practiced smile. Margaret's eyes found mine. We both knew Patricia had been the one who told on her. Every time, but the worst part wasn't the performance. It was what Patricia said when she thought I wasn't listening. I was in the kitchen one afternoon, when I heard Patricia's voice drop low, confidential. "You'll be taken care of," she told Margaret. "Estate management isn't your world, it's mine. I'll handle everything." There was a pause, then Margaret's weak voice. "That's kind of you, Patricia. It's what family does," Patricia said again, like she was reading from a script about what good sisters say. "You focus on resting. I'll take care of everything else. You don't need to worry." I walked in with Margaret's water. Patricia's smile snapped back into place instantly. "David? We were just discussing the logistics of how I can help after, well, you know, after." I heard, I said, setting the water down on the bedside table. Margaret caught my gaze. Her lips twitched into something that might have been a smile if she'd had the energy. Her eyes said everything. Watch this. This is going to be good. The next day, she asked me to call Richard. Richard came to the house on a Tuesday. Margaret was in the hospice bed, hooked up to oxygen and morphine. But her mind was sharp. I need to make some changes, she told him. My sister thinks she's inheriting everything. Is she? Richard asked. No, Margaret said. But I need her to think she is. Just for a little while, I didn't understand then. But Margaret explained it after Richard left. Patricia doesn't care about me, she said, fingers wrapped around mine. She cares about money. I want to see what she does when she thinks she's won. And Emily. Margaret's face hardened. Our daughter hasn't visited in 6 weeks. She hasn't called in 3. Patricia's been here every day. I want to know who shows up for grief and who shows up for greed. So we created 2 wills. The first, the one Richard would read at the funeral, left everything to Patricia. The second, sealed in his office, told the truth. This will hurt them, I said. Good, Margaret replied. They've earned it. Hash. Chapter 7. The End and the Beginning. Margaret died on a Sunday morning in November. The sky was that impossible Colorado blue, and the maple tree in our front yard was dropping gold leaves like confetti. She went peacefully, holding my hand with Miles Davis playing softly. Her last words were, "Don't let them win." I didn't. If this story feels familiar, you're not alone. I called Patricia 20 minutes later. Margaret passed this morning. She went peacefully. 3 seconds passed. Where are the documents? Not "I'm so sorry." Not, "How are you holding up?" Documents? I asked. Property deeds, bank statements, insurance policies. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She arrived in 19. Emily showed up an hour later. She hugged me for exactly 3 seconds, then asked, "Did Mom leave instructions for distribution?" "Richard will handle everything," I said. Both of them looked relieved. They were already counting money. Margaret wasn't cold yet. The funeral was 4 days later at a small chapel in Littleton. 30 people showed up, mostly Margaret's colleagues. A few neighbors, my brother Tom. Patricia wore black and sat in the front row like a widow, crying perfect tears that never smudged her makeup. Her husband sat beside her, in an expensive suit. Emily sat with Bryce, who checked his phone during the eulogy. Richard stood at the lectern after the service. Before we adjourn, I've been instructed to read Margaret's will. Patricia straightened. Emily pocketed her phone. Richard pulled out the cream envelope and opened it. Margaret's last will and testament, dated October 28th, leaves the entirety of her estate to her sister Patricia. Emily shot to her feet. "That's not, she wouldn't." "Sit down, Em," Patricia said coldly. "Your mother knew who she could trust." That's when I laughed. Patricia turned. Eyes narrowed. "You think this is funny, David?" "I think," I said, standing slowly, "that Margaret was the smartest person I ever met." Richard stepped down from the lectern and walked toward me. From his other pocket, he pulled a second envelope, sealed with red wax, Margaret's initials pressed into it. "Margaret left secondary instructions," Richard said, "to be read only after the primary will was announced publicly." He broke the seal. The chapel went silent. "If you're hearing this," Richard began reading, his voice steady and clear, "it means Patricia showed up to my funeral, expecting an inheritance. It also means Emily didn't contest it immediately, because she was expecting one too. That tells me everything I needed to know." Emily's face went white. Patricia sat frozen in her front row seat, hands gripping her purse. "To my sister Patricia," Richard continued, "you haven't called me in 3 years unless you needed something. You didn't visit me until you heard I was dying. You spent 2 weeks sitting by my bed talking about managing my estate. Not about memories we shared. Not about love, about money and properties and management companies. You don't get to profit from proximity to death. You inherit nothing." Patricia shot to her feet so fast her purse fell to the floor with a crack. "This is a joke. Richard, you can't. This isn't legal." Margaret wasn't in her right mind. To my daughter Emily, Richard read louder, talking over her protests. You've asked your father for money 17 times in the past 5 years. He documented it. You didn't visit me in the hospital. You didn't come when I went into hospice. You put me on hold to take another call. You haven't once asked your father if he's okay since I died. You inherit $50,000. Not because you deserve it, but because I'm your mother and I loved you anyway. Emily was crying now, but they weren't the tears of grief. They were the angry, betrayed tears of someone who just realized they'd miscalculated badly. Everything else, Richard read, his voice carrying through the silent chapel, goes to my husband David, the house in Congress Park that everyone thought was worthless, the property in Vale that we bought for cash, the investment portfolio no one knew existed. All of it. He earned it with 42 years of partnership, patience and love. And he's the only one who showed up for me instead of for my money. Richard lowered the paper and looked directly at Patricia. The estate, valued at approximately $8.6 million, is now entirely David's, with the exception of $50,000 to Emily, to be released in 30 days. This will include a no-contest clause. Any legal challenge results in complete forfeiture. The chapel was silent. Patricia found her voice. $8 million? You've been living in that shack with $8 million? We lived carefully, I said. Margaret wanted to know who'd show up for her, not her money. Congratulations, you both failed. Emily was shaking. Dad, I didn't know she was that sick. Work has been crazy and Bryce's project. The crypto scheme, I asked. The one you wanted me to invest $75,000 in last month, while your mother was dying. She didn't answer. Patricia grabbed her purse. This is fraud. I'll sue. My husband's lawyer, you'll hear from him. Everything is legal and notarized, Richard said calmly. Margaret wrote this will 8 days before she died, with 2 witnesses and a sound mind assessment from her oncologist. You're welcome to challenge it, Patricia. But the no contest clause is ironclad. The moment you file, Emily loses her $50,000 too. Patricia looked at Emily. Emily looked at Patricia, then Patricia stormed out, heels clicking like gunshots. Her husband followed. Emily and Bryce left 60 seconds later. The chapel emptied. Just me, Richard, and the funeral director, who looked like he'd witnessed a pay-per-view event. Richard handed me the will. She wrote you a note. It's in my office. Come by Monday. What does it say? That she loved you, and that she's sorry they turned out this way. # Chapter 11. The note I went to Richard's office the following Monday. The note was in Margaret's handwriting, shaky from medication but unmistakably hers. David, if you're reading this, you watch them show their true colors. I'm sorry, but I needed you to see it. The money is yours. Do what we talked about. The scholarship fund, the hospice donation, the quiet things that matter. Patricia will threaten to sue. She won't. It would cost more than her pride can afford. Emily might come back apologizing. That's your choice. But remember, people who only show up for money will only stay for money. I loved our quiet life. I loved you. I folded the note and put it in my wallet. Then I called my financial advisor and set up a meeting with Denver Hospice. # Chapter 12. What I built instead. 3 weeks later, I established a memorial scholarship at a university in Denver for first-generation students studying law. Full tuition, $100,000 annually, in perpetuity. The Hospice Foundation got $250,000 for a new palliative care wing. They named it after Margaret. I sold the Vale property for $2.8 million and donated half to a women's shelter Margaret had volunteered at in the 90s. Emily sent 12 texts in 2 days. Apologies, explanations, please. I responded once, you got what Mom thought you deserved. I hope it's enough. Patricia never sued. Richard was right. 2 weeks of rage, then silence. At her husband's Christmas party, she told people Margaret had been mentally unstable at the end. Her husband divorced her 4 months later. Turns out, humiliating your dying sister for an inheritance you didn't get isn't great for a marriage. And me, I still live in the Congress Park bungalow. I still drive the 2015 Camry. I still drink plain drip coffee. But now when I walk past Margaret's photo on the mantel, the one from our Estes Park honeymoon, her in hiking boots and jeans, I don't feel sad. I feel grateful. She spent 42 years teaching me that real wealth isn't what you have, it's what you do with it, and who you share it with. Patricia and Emily wanted an inheritance. Margaret left them a verdict. I got everything else.